It's shallow, it's muddy, it's weedy. You know, you could make somebody disappear pretty easy, right?
That's the Muskoka mystery, and everyone has their version on what happened.
Why are the old people still missing?
The ghosts of my dad and all of these other people walking the woods have said it's time and we'd like some justice.
One day we'll be sitting in court and the individuals responsible will have to justify their actions.
Gone without a trace, forgotten by society, even their families. But now, after a Fifth Estate investigation and a CBC podcast, millions want to know what happened.
She would have died for her cats, but maybe that's what happened. She wouldn't leave her cats.
For the first time, the police open up about closing in on the guilty.
This is a compelling investigation. If I were able to tell you all the facts, you would be astounded on just what transpired.
Mr. Allen.
We track down a suspect who's never spoken before.
The OPP says 4 people were murdered, and they have identified you previously as one of the suspects.
And a son discovers his father was a victim of the crime family too.
He's dead. She's saying what a wonderful man he was and they came to love him.
Yep.
And she's stealing his money.
Right. She's a con artist.
The question, are investigators finally on the verge of cracking a 2-decades-old cold case? The whole country is watching.
This missing person investigation began in 1998. We know the 4 missing people are not alive.
This past summer, after 23 years of near silence, the Ontario Provincial Police spoke out publicly about the Muskoka mystery.
This is a homicide investigation. It's open, and we are actively seeking information. It's been 20 years. Over the years, in my experience, people talk.
Detective Inspector Rob Matthews has spent almost his entire police career trying to piece together how and why 4 elderly people from Ontario cottage country went missing and are now presumed dead. For years, the OPP refused our request to interview him.
Pleased to meet you. Thank you.
That has changed.
You say it's an open investigation. You made that announcement publicly a couple of months ago. Why has it not gone further than open?
We are still collecting evidence to bring the persons responsible for this crime to justice.
2 decades later, what evidence is there to find now that you wouldn't have had access to in the past 20 years?
Well, it's amazing. Many people in historic investigations, they don't come forward in the beginning because they're scared, and as time goes on, oftentimes they believe that the police must have the information. And I can say, as a result of the press conference, we received a significant number of tips which allowed us to move this case forward.
For Detective Matthews, it all started long ago with what seemed a very different kind of case.
I was a young detective constable assigned to the Muskoka Crime Unit in Huntsville, and I was assigned to investigate a fraud on behalf of the Muskoka Christian School.
And what was that fraud?
The treasurer of the school had misappropriated a great deal of funds from the school.
That embezzling school treasurer was a woman named Catherine Lan from a large, somewhat notorious local family. Their name is spelled L-A-A-N. The Lan siblings attended high school in Huntsville and played sports there.
I met Catherine Lan for the first time in 1992.
Alice Petty first encountered Catherine Lan at the Christian school, where Alice taught and Lan volunteered to be treasurer. Both had kids who were students there.
We just had a lot of interaction at school, back and forth, and a lot of interaction because I'd pick up Jimmy, I'd drop off Marika, I'd pick up Marika. So I would say we were friends.
It was about the same time that some of the Lans, Catherine, her brothers Paul, Walter, and David, and their uncle Ron Allen, got involved in a new family business. They set up 3 retirement facilities in the woods outside Huntsville, including this one on the shores of Siding Lake. Their brochures touted attractive, affordable rooms in a cozy home-like atmosphere with on-site nurses and dietitians and activities like bowling and woodwork. The Lans made their pitch to less fortunate senior citizens, especially Christians, claiming to be doing God's work.
Were you aware of the retirement homes?
Yes.
What did you know about them?
Yes. She would go to Toronto and find people who had no connection to any other people, really, and she would entice them and say, you know, I have a nice retirement home up north, and it's a beautiful place.
For the elderly and infirm with little or no family support, the offer must have been like a dream come true. Invited to live in the idyllic Muskoka region, with room, board, and care for a price they could actually afford on their government checks. It all appeared to be perfect, but not for long.
It's unreal that one family can have so many criminals.
Jeff Vanderkloot is a contractor in Muskoka who first heard whispers about the Lans' past from longtime residents of the community.
I knew an old guy in the neighborhood who talked about them when they were kids. They played baseball and they were always finding a way to cheat the system.
But cheating in the local amateur baseball league would turn out to be the least of their problems. The oldest Lan brother, David, had a criminal record for breaking and entering and theft. His younger brother Walter Lan's record began at the age of 18 with property offenses, breaking and entering, fraud, even impersonating a police officer. And by 25, their sister Catherine Lan had been to jail for drugs, theft, and extortion. But by the mid-90s, a mother and a churchgoer, that all seemed to be in her past. And it might have stayed that way, if not for a twist of fate at the Muskoka Christian School, where contractor Jeff Vanderkloot, a board member there, became suspicious of how volunteer treasurer Catherine Lan was handling the school's money.
She never had any reports for anyone. You're supposed to have a financial report. She didn't even show up for board meetings. Finally, at a meeting, I was just like, doesn't anybody smell a rat? Probably 6 weeks or so later, got a phone call to meet in Huntsville, and we found out that she was stealing from the school.
Indeed, Catherine Lan would eventually be arrested, charged, and convicted of stealing about $30,000 from the Muskoka Christian School. Teacher and friend, Alice Petty.
I think the first word that comes to mind was betrayed. Like, I'm a very trusting person, and I felt betrayed professionally at the school and betrayed as a friend. She professed to be a Christian, and to do this when you profess to be a Christian is so unchristian.
But it would be those retirement homes that really got people in Muskoka talking when Jeff Vanderkloot got a first-hand glimpse of what was going on inside the Lan facilities.
I was taken back by the condition of the place and the conditions that they had to live in. In the room next was an old man just laying in bed. He was just laying there moaning and groaning. It just seemed very strange to me that this man would just be in an open room moaning and groaning, and thought to myself, boy, if my grandfather was here, he'd be going in the truck with me right now.
The Lans boasted about a staff dietitian, but police would later report residents might receive meals of Kraft Dinner 3 times a day. They say they discovered 11 elderly people crammed into a 4-bedroom house with mattresses on the floor. Ralph Grant, Doogie as he was known to friends, was one of them.
He was fast and furious, for want of a word. He always seemed to be on the go.
In his younger years, Doogie was a man about town in the automotive parts business. But his nephew Howard Grant says by his late 60s he'd fallen on hard times. He was told by police that Doogie was one of those recruited by the Land family while living in a homeless shelter in downtown Toronto.
Oh, I think he was taking advantage myself. I think if somebody's promised you a nice, quiet life for half the price, you know, it's a kind of a holding up a lollipop to a child, and like, you know, it turned out to be a horror show.
Detective Rob Matthews says it soon was clear the Land's residents were vulnerable people, lured to unregulated care facilities, far from home.
Was there nothing that could be done?
Not really. These were adults. Yes, they were vulnerable, disenfranchised people. Many of them had mental health or addiction issues. They resided in various shelters in Toronto that were overrun. You know, there's too many people for those facilities.
And there would be other questions, especially what were the Lands doing with their residents' money? And then the Muskoka mystery would deepen when one by one elderly people living with the Lands began to disappear, starting with the woman known locally as the Cat Lady. In the mid-1990s, a number of so-called Christian retirement homes began operating in the dense woods of the Muskoka region near Huntsville, Ontario, with idyllic names like Fern Glen Manor and Cedar Pines. They were owned by members of one local family, the Lands, with a clientele of lonely elderly people promised affordable home-like care. If that sounded too good to be true, it was. That elder care business and the family behind it were about to attract the attention of an up-and-coming young detective with the Ontario Provincial Police. In 1998, Erin Burke was assigned what seemed a routine missing persons case. At the time, she had no idea where it all would lead.
I was assigned to investigate a possible missing female by the name of Joan Lawrence.
We have dramatized her investigation, the words spoken by an actor, but taken directly from police documents that detail Detective Burke's inquiry into the disappearance of Joan Lawrence.
She is an elderly woman who was also known in the town of Huntsville as the Cat Lady.
Known as the Cat Lady because on any given day, Joan Lawrence could be seen walking the 13 kilometers from the Land property into town to buy food for the dozens of cats she kept. She lived here, not in the main Land residence, but right behind it in a decrepit shed where OPP Detective Rob Matthews paid her a visit.
How would you describe it?
It was an 8x10 garden shed, one that you would buy at Home Hardware or Cashway, chipboard walls. There was a hole punched through the wall with an extension cord. Inside, there was a single bed that was piled high with clothing. The floor was covered in newspaper, a small space heater, and the overwhelming stench of ammonia as I walked in.
He says the smell was from 30 or so cats with which Lawrence shared the space. She paid the Land $600 a month rent, almost all the money she had.
There was no other place. She was trapped. She had no place to go. That was it.
Unlike most in Muskoka, Linda Charbonneau got to know the real Joan Lawrence. Every day she would come to the grocery store where Linda worked for free coffee and friendship. That's how Linda learned why Joan was paying the Land so much for that falling down shed.
Her cats meant so much to her that she put up with living in those living conditions for the sake of keeping her beloved pets, her family.
But Joan Lawrence wasn't always the Muskoka cat lady. It took some digging, but we were able to find out about her past. Born in Ottawa in 1921, by her 20s, she worked as a copywriter for a Toronto newspaper. No small feat for a woman in the 1940s. What's more, she was a published poet.
The window of the florist shop was gay with flowers in an orderly array. Happy that it had seen the great outside, the little flower smiled at me and died.
The Little White Rose was printed in the Toronto Star in 1941, though it seems to foreshadow the troubles that lay ahead for the 70-something Joan.
I don't want to say it this way, but that she was somebody at one time. She was somebody, and now she was just a cat lady.
But shortly after Detective Matthews' visit, the cat lady disappeared.
At what point did you learn that she was missing?
2 days later, when I went back onto the property with the public health inspector, that garden shed had been completely cleaned out, and she was nowhere to be found.
When she was officially declared a missing person, OPP Detective Constable Aaron Burke got the case.
Our source informed us that he had not seen her for at least 3 weeks, which was highly unusual.
According to Aaron Burke, she also learned that when Lawrence disappeared, she'd been complaining about her missing tax refund, a seemingly minor matter that would turn out to be anything but. Her friend, Linda Charbonneau, says Joan was desperate to find the refund check she was expecting, nearly $750, a fortune to the cat lady.
Yeah, she just asked me if I got my income tax back.
Right.
And I went, yeah, I got it like a month ago or a long time ago. I said, why? She goes, well, I filed a while ago and I just never got my check. And I said, oh, well, I guess you should better look into that. So she goes, I'm going to look into that.
Linda says she understood what Joan intended to do was to confront her landlords about that missing tax check. Because the land sometimes picked up her mail, she suspected they might have had something to do with it.
And did you hear back about what she found?
No, I didn't. I don't think I remember seeing her after that.
Literally, that was the last time you may have seen her.
I think so, yeah.
What's more, Detective Burke reported the missing tax refund check had already been cashed, endorsed with a signature that didn't belong to Joan Lawrence.
Do you know who cashed that check?
We do. I can confirm that that was one of the starting points for this investigation, but I won't go into the details on who did what.
That may well be a clue that police today are on the right track. But back then, the question was, where was Joan? With money now a motive, the fear was that Aaron Burke's missing persons case could well have become a murder.
I don't believe that Lawrence moved off of the property. Her body may be buried on the property.
The search of that land property began in the area around Joan Lawrence's shed. However, no remains were found. But if Burke's search of the land and woods didn't produce a body, what about the murky Muskoka waters, she wondered.
Due to the fact that the land property is located on Siding Lake, it's possible that Lawrence's deceased body is located in this lake.
But in the ink-like depths of Siding Lake, what started as a 4-day search became 2 tedious weeks of combing the muddy, weedy bottom, looking for Lawrence. Again, in the end, police turned up nothing. And then the years began to pass. Still no body, still no case. It has now been 2 decades since Joan Lawrence vanished from that land property outside Huntsville. Searches would continue on and off. Ultimately, Aaron Burke would be transferred away from Muskoka. Then she left the OPP. The case still unresolved.
And then it even says that they're looking for her deceased remains.
And that was when the Fifth Estate joined the Walrus magazine and went to court, asking for access to police files that have been sealed for decades.
And in the very beginning, they were looking for, they were looking at a check.
We got almost 500 pages of previously secret documents, which allowed our editorial team to recreate the OPP investigation from years ago, what the police believe happened, and who they think did it.
Is there any indication whose signature it is? Do we see that anywhere?
I think there's a lot of inference about whose signature it might be, but I don't think we actually see the name. Yeah.
Call it inference or following the money. But by digging deeper into Joan Lawrence's finances, Detective Burke reported finding something she believed could unlock the case.
I telephoned the Toronto Dominion Bank. She confirmed that Lawrence had an account there and added that it was a joint account.
It was the beginning of a money trail that would lead back to the Land family. When Burke says she learned that for some reason Joan Lawrence had a joint bank account with none other than her landlord David Land. Police say they also found out that often when Joan Lawrence made a withdrawal when her monthly check came in, she immediately handed the money to a man waiting outside the bank. Lawrence's friend Linda Charbonneau recalls seeing that person too.
And there was one time that I saw her at the front of the store where the cashes are with his hand out and her just piling his hand up with money. And when he got his stash, which looked like a large amount, he turned his back and just walked out the door and just left her there.
And according to Aaron Burke's reports, a number of local residents said they frequently saw David Land with Joan Lawrence. And another name kept coming up, the Land's uncle, Ron Allen.
It has been determined from several witness interviews that Allen had a great deal of contact with Lawrence. Allen also picked up her mail, or would drive her to pick up her mail. He drove her to the food bank. He drove her to pick up her cat food. And he would drive her to the bank to get her money.
And here's what police found really surprising. David Land was Joan Lawrence's landlord. He had access to her bank account. He and his uncle Ron Allen gave her rides to town and saw her virtually every day. But when the cat lady disappeared from their property, none of the Lands ever reported her missing. It was after that when Aaron Burke spoke with David Land several times. Police documents show he claimed he didn't know where Joan Lawrence was, but then gave varying versions of what had happened. First saying she was afraid of the police and in hiding. But police say his story then changed. She'd gone to New York to see a wealthy friend. She was visiting Vancouver. She was on vacation in Hawaii. All hard to believe of someone with barely enough money to feed her cats.
Where did they say she was?
They provided several different locations, but the specifics of that I won't get into as it is a point of evidence.
Yeah, we understand that they said she was visiting friends in New York. She was in some exotic location, which didn't seem really plausible, did it?
No, it did not.
And Aaron Burke reported she found another key clue in Joan Lawrence's bank records for that joint account she shared with her landlord David Land.
The last activity on the account was at the Canadian Tire store in Bracebridge.
Police found that last activity suspicious because it was done by bank card. But no card had ever been issued to Joan Lawrence. Police say the only card on that account was issued in the name of David Land. And here's the thing. Joan's friends said they hadn't seen her since the beginning of October. But police report that throughout October to mid-November, that bank card in David Land's name was used at least 6 times. This is David Land in recent years in Toronto. He's been publicly silent about the case for over 2 decades. But questions about what happened then still follow him now. There may be a legitimate reason for him to have had access to the bank account of one of his elderly residents to help manage her money or pay her rent. But wouldn't he also be likely to know where she went, or at least to have reported her missing? But then, the police investigation would dramatically expand when they discovered that 3 other senior citizens had also gone missing from land retirement homes, along with their money. The search for the missing cat lady, Joan Lawrence, would go on for years. 1998, 1999, 2000. But no body was found, and as far as we know, no murder weapon or surprise witnesses. But as the Ontario Provincial Police investigation unfolded, Detective Aaron Burke would come upon a startling fact. Joan Lawrence was not the only one who disappeared from retirement homes run by the Land family. Incredibly, she discovered 3 other senior citizens were missing as well. 70-something John Crofts, a shoe salesman from Toronto. Irish-born farm worker John Semple in his early 90s. And Ralph Grant, 70 years old, from Nova Scotia, known as Doogie. And when they disappeared, the Lands never reported them missing. 2 decades after those senior citizens vanished, no one has ever been charged. The police records obtained by the Fifth Estate revealed new details about the disappearance of Joan Lawrence that had been blacked out for decades.
I have been living here for approximately 1 year. Joan Lawrence already lived here when I moved to this place.
Police had a secret source who lived in the Land retirement home from which Joan Lawrence disappeared. His name is Al Marshall, and he became Detective Burke's primary contact, quietly providing information as she went from investigating a missing person case to a homicide. We've dramatized that investigation with an actor speaking words adapted from Burke's reports.
I haven't seen her in at least 3 weeks, which is highly unusual.
It was Al Marshall who first reported that Joan Lawrence went missing in the fall of 1998. And there's another stunning revelation in Detective Burke's communication with her source, what Al Marshall says he saw and heard outside the retirement home on the day he last saw Joan Lawrence alive.
Around the last time I saw Lawrence, I saw Walter Land driving a backhoe up towards the north end of the property where she lived. It was after 6 p.m. and it was dark. Around the last time I saw her, I also heard the sound of gunshots.
According to Detective Burke, her source, Al Marshall, came to his own conclusion.
I believe she never left the property and that she's not alive.
What can you tell us about what you believe happened to Joan Lawrence?
We do know that when she was moved from the garden shed, she relocated to an area about 600 meters away. There were several abandoned vehicles in that location, and she lived in an old derelict van.
Yeah. Was that the location that Al Marshall described? The north end of the property?
Yes.
Yeah. Where he said he heard the backhoe and the shots.
I won't speak to that.
Marshall advised me of the following information: that on Saturday, November 28, 1998, David Land telephoned him.
What's more, according to Burke's report, Al Marshall also said David Land instructed him to intentionally mislead police about where Joan Lawrence was.
He advised me that the police tried to speak with me about Lawrence. I was supposed to tell him that I saw her on Friday in Bracebridge with him.
In truth, Marshall says he hadn't seen Joan Lawrence for 3 weeks. Indeed, to this day, none of them has been seen again. Not John Crofts, or John Semple, Joan Lawrence, or Doogie Grant. Today, Grant's nephew Howard has no doubt foul play was involved.
Well, I think it's obvious. Myself, I would think either Doogie passed away, natural causes, and they disposed of the body, or he was helped. That's my...
You say he was helped, he was killed.
Yep.
But what about the classic elements of a crime? Means, motive, opportunity. You might understand how the circumstantial aspects here could be persuasive to some. In fact, after several months of her investigation for the OPP, Detective Aaron Burke, apparently, was persuaded. In the police applications to search the lake at the land property, Burke swore a statement in which she explicitly states she believes the disappearance of 77-year-old Joan Lawrence was first-degree murder. And while many of the details in the documents we obtained were blacked out, in that search warrant application, two important names are right there in black and white. Who did Aaron Burke identify as the suspects in Lawrence's homicide? Her landlord, David Land, and his uncle, Ron Allen.
I believe that David Land and Ron Allen have committed the offense of murder in the first degree upon victim Joan Dorothy Lawrence, sometime between October 28, 1998 through to November 27, 1998.
And the notes kept by Burke show why she was convinced they were responsible.
I believe Lawrence's death occurred to prevent her from reporting frauds, thefts, mistreatment, and neglect she was enduring at the hands of David Land and Ron Allen.
The OPP recently released new photos from their investigation. This is the van where they believe Lawrence last lived before she met her end, hidden away in the forest on the north side of the land property, away from the house and other residents, tucked in amongst a row of abandoned vehicles and junk that no one had any use for.
Is it plausible that someone with a backhoe could have buried Joan Lawrence on the property and she would not have been found to this day?
The property was 68 acres. It wasn't typical Muskoka country, bedrock. It was very sandy. Anything's possible.
If it seems the Land family may be the people who could best explain why Joan Lawrence was moved to that abandoned van just before she went missing, Detective Rob Matthews thinks so too. But they're not talking, and without more evidence, he can't make them.
You've characterized the Land family as not being cooperative. What do you mean by that?
Well, we have reached out to the Land family on numerous occasions, and they have never provided a formal statement. We generally put people in a few different categories: witness, a person of interest, or a suspect. As an officer, I won't say which category they fall into. I'll let you make that assumption, but we are certainly interested in speaking to them.
At the residences?
I'm not interested, thanks.
The OPP says...
After the break, we catch up with a key member of the Land family, someone who's managed to remain out of the public eye and away from our cameras for years.
By 2002, the investigative team had identified 46 past residents who lived in one or more of the properties.
It was in 2019, 23 years since the Muskoka mystery began, that the Ontario Provincial Police announced previously unknown facts about the so-called retirement homes run by members of the Land family.
I can confirm, during the operation of these homes, 16 persons died, with 12 being reported to the authorities. The 4 remaining deaths that were not reported are the 4 individuals that we are seeking information on today.
What's more, Detective Inspector Rob Matthews revealed that members of the Land family had stolen government pension money from all 16 of them, including the 4 believed murdered.
the presumption is, and you've said as much, that the Lands were stealing this money before and after their residents died or disappeared. In a sense, they were worth more dead to the Lands than they were alive, weren't they? They got all of the money.
They got all the money and didn't have to put any money out to care for them.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true. Checks were cashed long after the death of those confirmed individuals.
It seems the Land's main criminal motive was to systematically steal their residents' pension benefits for as long as possible.
I think what you're looking at is a guy who's had a very tough, hard life. That life is escaping from his fingers, kind of like sliding down into a pit.
In his prime, Michael Hurley's father, Jeff, was a newspaperman, union organizer, and outdoorsman. But after a breakdown, he found himself in the Muskoka Woods at a land seniors facility called Cedar Pines.
From what we know about the Lands, they looked for people who were basically on their own, who were adrift.
Yeah, that would be my dad.
Jeff Hurley died in hospital at 76, apparently of natural causes.
The very last time I went and saw him, he was at the Huntsville Hospital. I remember sitting outside with him. He's sitting in a wheelchair. He has a catheter, and has an IV, and he's smoking. And he struck me as a very old man who life had ground him down. Take this photograph.
And until he got a call from the Fifth Estate, Michael Hurley hadn't questioned what happened to his dad's money.
It's one of those things that's out of sight, out of mind.
So
now,
literally until recently.
Until you guys started calling me. And it's like, this was ancient history.
But now he's on the money trail, trying to track down the government death benefit payable to his father's next of kin.
Service Canada, how can I help you?
That should be Michael, but someone else has collected the money.
I'm calling about my father's estate. Now, someone else received the death benefit according to the letter here. How would they have gotten that?
In order to apply for next of kin, you need to provide some other sort of document. So it's weird.
Yeah.
It's really weird.
Yeah, okay. I think I figured it out how it was done.
So who got the cash? Both he and OPP investigator Rob Matthews may have the same hunch.
Do you know who that other applicant might have been?
I believe I do, but I can't.
Is the last name L-A-A-N? Lan?
It is a point of evidence, so I can't comment on that.
And after Jeff died, Michael Hurley got a letter from none other than Catherine Lan herself.
Despite all the grief and trouble he often caused, we at Cedar Pines did learn to care about Jeff. Some of us even learned to love him.
That's a very nice letter.
It's a nice letter. I mean, quite frankly, it says all the right things. There's nothing in there that would set off alarm bells or anything.
Yeah, except we now know that when she wrote that very nice letter after the death of your dad, she was stealing his Canada Pension Plan and old age security money.
She's a con artist, and clearly she was very good at it until she got caught.
It's yet another in the litany of crimes committed by members of the Lan family. In this one, siblings Catherine, Walter, and Paul, all convicted for stealing at least $100,000 from the 12 elderly people who died and the 4 who disappeared while in their care.
How unusual is it to find a family like the Lans with criminal records?
This is certainly the only experience I have in my 27 years on the job. It is very difficult. Most families are very close, and this family is no exception. They are a very close-knit family.
It's a close-knit family we have visited a number of times over the years in the Fifth Estate's coverage of this story.
Mr. Lan, we'd like to talk to you about Joan Lawrence and the others who disappeared.
In 2017, there was brother David Lan.
The Ontario Provincial Police have been investigating you over the years. They believe Joan Lawrence was the victim of a first-degree murder, and they believe you and your uncle Ron Allen are the suspects. Catherine.
In 2018, sister Catherine Lan.
What happened to them? What happened to Joan Lawrence and the others?
Thank you, sir.
Good morning.
In 2019, there was brother Walter Land.
Mr. Land, can you talk to us, please?
He had spent 11 years in prison for assaulting and robbing senior citizens in home invasions.
Is there any way you can try to explain why 16 people died, 4 of them believed to be murdered? Do you have any explanation for that at all?
The 4th Land sibling, Paul, we never managed to locate. And there is another member of this family, Ron Allen, known as Uncle Ron. According to Linda Charbonneau, he was the cat lady Joan Lawrence's landlord who terrorized her by threatening to kill one of her cats.
She told me that he had his foot on the cat and he was just taunting her. And she was extremely upset. And when she was telling me the story, of course, she got upset again, like, you know, relived it and pleaded with him. Please don't hurt my cat, you know, and he just said, like, what are you gonna do about it?
We could locate only a single 20-year-old photograph of Ron Allen. And despite substantial efforts, we had no clues as to his whereabouts.
Mr. Allen.
Until this.
The OPP says 4 people were murdered, and they have identified you previously as one of the suspects. What can you tell us about that? Is there anything you can say to those people whose 4 relatives have disappeared? Nothing at all.
As for Michael Hurley, his father's death after living in a Land retirement home was tainted by fraud. It's why he believes investigators cannot give up.
You have 16 people who had no voice. Somebody needs to speak for those 16. These were the weakest members of our society. There has to be an answer. And therefore, it's important to keep digging to find out why. Give their ghosts closure so that they don't walk at night going, what about me?
The enemy of any cold case is time. Other than the victim, some connected to this one have already died, including the original informant, Al Marshall. And recently, Catherine Land, the woman behind the family-run facilities where so many lost their money and disappeared. For Detective Rob Matthews, it makes a breakthrough in the case all the more urgent.
When you allow yourself to look ahead and see this resolved, where it's no longer the thing you think of first thing every morning and last thing at night, how does that happen?
We can finally bring justice to the families of those victims. Every police officer, I think if you ask them, why do we do this to serve, to make a difference. And I wish I could talk about what I saw in those homes, but when this case finally is resolved, I feel those families will have justice. It just takes one person. The missing piece of the puzzle is out there somewhere. I'm very optimistic that we will find it. It's just a matter of time.